Good morning, students. I hope all of you are taking care of yourself and I hope all of your preparation is going fine. Welcome to today's Analyst. This is 3rd of November 2023 and we are here to discuss important articles from The Hindu and The Indian Express. Now let's see the table of contents. First topic is related to India's taxation system. The second topic is related to Enforcement Directorate, especially its functions. Third topic is related to protected areas, which is in relation to your environment and ecology. Fourth topic is related to FATF, that is Financial Action Task Force. The last but not the least topic is related to Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, that is CTBT. Let's start with the first topic. The first topic is related to India's taxation system. Now recently, the data has suggested healthy growth in direct and GST revenues, that is the indirect tax revenues in our country. Why it is important for us? For our General Studies Paper 3, Indian economy and issues relating to it, this topic becomes very important. So let's start with the topic. Now first thing which we need to understand is what is a tax. Now tax is a compulsory or a mandatory financial payment which needs to be made by the people to the government. So generally, taxation is a process and tax is a payment which is levied by the government on individuals and organizations of a country. And it is a compulsory payment and it is a mandatory payment. Now why it is compulsory, why it is mandatory and why the government is levying this tax, this is what we need to understand. So in order to understand this, we need to delve a little deeper into the purpose of taxation. That is, what is the purpose of taxation? First purpose is to allocate the resources. But before understanding the purpose of taxation, you need to understand the objectives of government and what is the role of government. So role of government in every society is to ensure public welfare. Now the role of government is to ensure public welfare in order to ensure that government makes sure that it takes money from those who are having the resources and distributes, that is redistribute the money to the poor public. That means those who are in need of money. So allocation of resources first of all. Government needs to allocate various resources which are present in the society. And in order to do that, government collects compulsory payment from the public in the form of taxes. Second is distribution of income, which we discussed. That is, government needs to distribute income by taking some income from the richer sections and redistributing it to the poor sections. In order to ensure what? In order to ensure equity and equitable distribution across the country, so that everyone in the country can enjoy and get the benefit of economic growth and development. The third is inflation control. Now let's take a scenario that in a country, people are earning a lot, people are having a lot of money. Now, since people are having a lot of money, there will be inflation. That is, price of the products, price of the commodities, prices of the goods and services in the economy are bound to rise because people are having a lot of money. So people will be willing to pay more and more for those products. So naturally, inflation is going to happen. Now, if inflation is going to happen, government needs to control it because inflation is very harmful for whom? For the poor section of the society. And if inflation is harmful for the poor section of the society, government makes sure that government cures it. And in order to ensure government controls this inflation, government imposes taxes. And let's say government has already imposed taxes, but during the period of high inflation, government increases the tax imposition. That is, government increases the rate at which they impose the taxes, so that the extra money which is there with the public goes to the government. And what does government do? Government again uses that money to distribute it to the poor in form of welfare schemes, in form of infrastructural development, in form of various grants. So in various forms, government makes sure that the tax which it collects from certain section of the society is dispersed off to all the sections of the society. In order to ensure what? In order to ensure cumulative welfare of the society. Because that primarily is the motive of the government. Now, there are two types of primary taxes if we talk in economic sense. in our country as well, you will see two kinds of taxes being imposed. Now, before understanding what is direct and indirect tax, that is the two type of taxes, let's try to understand this with the help of an example. I'll give you an example first and then make you understand what is direct and what is indirect tax. Now, let's take the example of your income tax. Let's take the example of your income tax. Now, income tax, all of your parents must be paying. Some of you also who are working professionals would be paying your income tax. Income tax you directly pay to the government. So, income tax on the portal, you assess your income tax. This is the income tax and it directly goes to the government department, right? But now let's take the example of GST. Now, you all must have purchased goods and services from the market. All of you must be wearing clothes right now. All of you must be having your phone with you. On purchasing of that phone or on joining any institute, joining a school or joining a college, you must have paid GST. You must have paid a tax called GST. Now, did you pay that tax to the government? Did you pay GST to the government? Just remember, let's say you went on to buy this watch. And in this watch, GST is applicable. So, I paid this GST to the shopkeeper. And in turn, the shopkeeper paid this GST to the government. So, what do we see? GST ultimately is being paid by whom? Ultimately, it is being paid by us. But are we paying it directly to the government? No. There is an intermediary in between. So, first is income tax, second is GST. Now, income tax is an example of your direct tax, whereby you as individuals are directly paying the taxes to the government. And GST is an example of indirect tax, whereby you are paying the taxes but not directly to the government. There is someone in between to whom you are paying taxes and that someone is ultimately paying the tax to the government. So it is that you are paying the tax to the government in an indirect way, right? That is indirect tax. So direct taxes, what are the other examples? First, of course, is the income tax. Then there is wealth tax as well. There is gift tax as well that you directly pay to the government. Indirect tax, for example, your VAT. VAT was existent. Sales tax, goods and services tax, that is your GST, right? So all these taxes you indirectly pay to the government. So two types of taxes, direct and indirect. Now, what are the methods of taxation? That is very important for us to understand. Methods of taxation. There are primarily three kinds of methods. First is progressive, second regressive, and third proportional. Now, let's talk about progressive taxation first. Now, we discussed about income tax, if you remember. Now, how income tax is levied? Let's say your income is under 5 lakh. You need to pay certain amount of tax, right? If your income is from 5 to 10, you need to pay some more percentage of tax. Your income is from 10 to 20, you need to pay certain more proportion of tax. So what do we see? As your income is increasing, the burden of taxation on you is also increasing. So it's increasing in a progressive way. As and when the income increases, you need to pay higher and higher taxes. And that is what you call as progressive taxation. That as and when your income increases, the burden of taxation on you also rises. Second type is the regressive tax. Now, regressive tax simply means that there is one proportion of tax which is levied on everyone. For example, you remember we discussed about GST right now. So let's say I went on to purchase this watch of 10,000 rupees. And on that, I paid, let's say, GST of 1,000 rupees. So if I paid GST of 1,000 rupees on this watch, let's say you as students, maybe let's imagine your income is lower than me. You also went to the same store to buy this watch. Your income is of course lower than me. And you are paying how much GST on this watch? You also are paying 1,000 rupees GST on this watch. So what do we see? Your income does not matter. The tax will remain the same. And is it regressive for you or not? Because your income is less, still you are paying 1000 rupees taxes, which means it is regressive in nature. Its burden is more on the poor population. That is your regressive taxation. Now let's talk about proportional taxation. Now proportional taxation, if you remember, when we were discussing progressive taxation, we discussed various slabs. And as the income increased, we saw the tax rate also increased. But let's say now if we have different slabs and in those slabs income increased, but the tax slab remains constant. That is 10%. That will be known as proportional taxation. That is 10% of every person's income will be taxed. So you are taxing income not on the basis of higher or lower income. You are taxing income on the basis of proportion. That is 10 percentage points of every income will be taxed. Whether your income is 1 crore, whether your income is 10,000 rupees, 10% tax you have to pay. Again, it is burdensome for the poor population. And in our country, income tax laws, we are following a progressive taxation system. Now let us discuss in brief the various reforms in the direct tax system in our country. Direct tax means the tax which we are directly paying to the government. So what are the reforms in it? First is of course the direct tax code. Now it is a proposed code by the government whereby the direct tax like income tax, gift tax, wealth tax will be simplified. Their rules will be simplified and all the taxes will be clubbed into one in order to increase tax compliance and reduce tax evasion. That is your direct tax code. Second is your dividend distribution tax. Now earlier what used to happen was that whenever companies distributed dividend to the shareholders, in that case, companies had to pay tax to the government. Companies, of course, used to deduct the tax from the dividend, but they used to pay the tax to the government. And in 2020, what happened is government abolished this dividend distribution tax. And government said that whatever the dividends now public would be making, that would be chargeable under their normal income tax laws. So in your normal income tax slabs, this dividend which you earn from the shares from the securities, that dividend will be taxable under your income tax. So that is one reform. Another reform is this policy of transparent taxation honoring the honest. So transparent taxation honoring the honest policy of 2020. It includes first of all your faceless assessment. That is faceless assessment. The person who is assessing your tax would not be knowing who you are in order to ensure objectivity in assessment of taxes. Then taxpayer charter. A charter means basically a document whereby your rights, roles, responsibilities and duties are mentioned in order to ensure that taxpayers are made aware. Then faceless appeal. So as and when you are appealing based on your taxation, the taxation amount, the assessing of your taxes, if you are appealing on it, it will also be faceless. That is, other person would not be knowing that who has filed this particular appeal. Now last is general anti-avoidance rule. Now under general anti-avoidance rule, the income tax authorities and the taxation authorities, they are having a discretion. And if they feel so that a particular transaction is specifically made, now listen to this very carefully. If they believe, if the income tax authority believes that a particular transaction is specifically made just for the purpose of tax avoidance, in that case, they can decline giving that tax benefit to a particular entity, to a particular person. Again, I'm repeating, in this case, general anti-avoidance rules, if the income tax authority or the taxation authorities believe and get to know that you are doing a particular transaction just in order to avoid tax, just in order to evade the taxes, in that case, these income tax authorities, taxation authorities have the power, have the discretion to make you available not that particular scheme which you are taking benefit of. that particular system which you are taking benefit of. This is your general anti-avoidance rules. Now let us come to the reforms in indirect taxes. Now the biggest ever reform in the indirect tax system in our country is the introduction of your goods and services tax, that is your GST. Now GST is a destination-based tax. GST is a destination-based tax which is imposed on goods and services in the entire country. Now GST comprises of CGST, SGST and IGST. Now GST in particular is accumulation of various other indirect taxes which were present in our country prior to the introduction of GST. Especially your VAT, especially your sales taxes and variety of other taxes which were applied by the state as well, octroi duty, a lot of other taxes which are applied by states and by the center. So it basically reduced down the multiplicity of taxes, and I will use one word. It reduced the cascading effect of taxation on various goods and services. So that's the reform in your indirect tax system as well. And if you see this particular line graph, you will see that over the last many years, especially the last 15 years, the compliance and the growth in a net direct and indirect tax has shown a very considerable trend, right? So for your own perusal, you can refer to this particular diagram. Now let us move on to the second topic, that is Enforcement Directorate and what are the functions for it. Now recently, Enforcement Directorate has summoned the sitting Chief Minister of Delhi, that is Arvind Kejriwal. Now why it is important for us? For a general studies paper 2, statutory, regulatory and various quasi-judicial bodies, this topic becomes very, very important. Now what is Enforcement Directorate? That is what we need to understand first. Now Enforcement Directorate is a premier financial investigation agency of Government of India. So it's a premier agency which is responsible for financial investigation. Financial investigation in order to implement what laws? In order to implement money laundering and foreign exchange laws in our country. Now it is under Department of Revenue of a Ministry of Finance and it is a statutory body. Now in 1956, the particular body was named as Enforcement Unit. And in the subsequent year 1957, it was named as Directorate of Enforcement, that is Enforcement Directorate. In 1960, its control was shifted from Department of Economic Affairs to Department of Revenue of Ministry of Finance. And what are the laws which it governs? Firstly, it used to govern this FERA 1947, that is Foreign Exchange Regulation Act 1947, then Foreign Exchange Regulation Act in 1973. After that, the FEMA, that is Foreign Exchange Management Act of 1999 and Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002. These are the primary two acts which this Enforcement Directorate enforces and implements. So what are the laws enforced by this ED? Laws enforced by ED first of all are FEMA 1999, Foreign Exchange Management Act 1999, then Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002, then Fugitives Economics Offender Act 2018, then Sponsoring Organization under 1974 Foreign Exchange Conservation and Smuggling Activity Prevention Act. So under these laws are basically the laws which ED can enforce. Now what are the primary functions of ED? This is what we need to understand. First function is to conduct investigation under FEMA and also to adjudicate and impose penalty if a person is found guilty. Also to execute provisions of Prevention of Money Laundering Act and Fugitive Economic Offenders Act. Now under this Fugitive Economic Offenders Act, ED is having the power to attach various properties of those fugitive economic offenders. And also they are having the power for warranting arrest and providing confiscation of properties by the Union government. So that is the power which Enforcement Directorate is having. Now it is also having two more powers, that is search and seizure. Search of what? Search of properties. And seizure of what? Seizure of money and documents. Now one more thing which you need to understand for ED, it is having all India jurisdiction. And all personals in India come under the jurisdiction of ED. But one thing which is a very peculiar thing, that ED is not having suo motu power. That ED in itself can't take a case in its own hands. It can't take suo motu cognizance. So that is also one peculiar point which you need to understand once you understand the functions of Enforcement Directorate. So that's it for this topic. Let's move on to the next topic, that is protected areas. Now recently an editorial is there in the newspaper, and also one more thing which is there is this November 3rd, which marks the second anniversary of World Biosphere Reserve Day. And based on this, an editorial is also there in the newspaper. Now, why it is important, biosphere reserves, and in total the protected area topic, why it is important? Your General Studies Paper 3, Environment and Ecology section, this topic becomes very, very important. Now, let us try to understand what are protected areas. Now, protected areas are the areas where human occupation or resource exploitation is restricted. So, any area where human exploitation and human occupation, resource exploitation is restricted are known as protected areas. Now, there is close to 990 protected areas in our country, which includes 106 national parks, 564 wildlife sanctuaries, 99 conservation reserves, 218 community reserves, which covers a total of 1,73,053 km square. This is your protected areas. Now what you understand, protected areas consist of national parks, it consists of wildlife sanctuaries, consists of conservation reserves, community reserves. Now after this protected area, we will understand what are biosphere reserves as well. But first of all, we need to understand this concept of protected area came under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Now under that, wildlife sanctuary and national parks were given. Now what are wildlife sanctuaries? Wildlife sanctuaries are the areas which state government can declare, and these areas should have adequate ecological, geomorphological and natural significance. Those areas can be declared as wildlife sanctuaries by the state government. What are national parks? National parks are the areas having sufficient ecological, faunal, floral, geomorphological, national and zoological significance. So prima facie what we understand, that national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, they appear to be similar, but there is considerable difference between the two. Now, what is the difference? See, national parks provide a greater degree of protection as compared to your wildlife sanctuaries. Now, livestock grazing, the various activities like livestock grazing, they are regulated in wildlife sanctuaries, but they are not permitted in areas of national parks. Which means again, national parks are more secure and they are having greater degree of protection for the flora and fauna in that particular area. Wildlife sanctuaries in that activities are regulated, right? Also, one more thing is that wildlife sanctuaries can be for a particular species as well, right? For a particular species, this particular wildlife sanctuary can be created. But for national parks, it is usually not primarily for a particular species. It is usually for a variety of species of flora and fauna. Now, what is most important for us, because we are celebrating the day for biosphere reserves, that is why it is important for us to understand what is biosphere reserves. Now, biosphere reserves, first of all, are recognized by your UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve program, right? And biosphere reserves are the part of natural and cultural landscapes, which are the large areas of terrestrial and coastal marine ecosystems. Now, these are the areas where humans and nature coexist. Humans and nature coexist. This is very important for us to understand. And it also promotes sustainable development based on local community efforts and sound scientific practices. Right? So these all areas, these are particular concepts. Accumulation of all these concepts make your biosphere reserves. Now, what are the various zones of biosphere reserves? There are 3 zones. First is the core zone, second is the buffer zone, and third is the transition zone. Now, the core zone is the most protected one, where a lot of human activities are not at all allowed. Buffer zone, a little bit more relaxation is there, and transition zone, a lot of relaxation is there based on human involvement in that particular area. So in core area of biosphere reserve, the degree of protection is the highest. This is what we need to understand about protected areas and biosphere reserves. Now let's come to the fourth topic, that is FATF, Financial Action Task Force. Now a recent report by FATF has stated that a violent extremist organization in India has collected funds through well-structured networks. Now why this FATF is important? For a General Studies Paper 3, Money Laundering and its Prevention, FATF is important. For a General Studies Paper 2, International Agencies, Institutions, in that respect also FATF becomes very, very important. Now let's move on to understand what is FATF. Financial Action Task Force is an intergovernmental organization whose main role was to prevent and combat money laundering in the entire world. Now this was established in the year 1989 during the G7 summit. Now let us understand a few factual things about this FATF. Its headquarters is there in Paris, France, and its members include 39 members, which is 37 countries plus 2 organizations, that is European Commission and Gulf Cooperation Council, that is GCC. Now India became a member of this FATF in the year 2010. So that's it about the factual information about FATF. Now let's understand about its functions. So first function is that it sets international standards to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. That is very important for us. Money laundering and terrorist financing. These two things are the main focus areas for FATF. Also, it assesses and monitors the compliance with the FATF standards. It conducts typologies, studies of money laundering and terrorist financing methods. And it also responds to the various new and emerging threats in this particular domain, in this particular area at an international sphere, international arena. Now, what are the two types of list which this FATF maintains? First is your blacklist. Now, in this blacklist, it is issued to list countries which are found to be non-cooperative in the global fight against money laundering and terrorist financing. So the countries which are found to be uncooperative, non-cooperative to the global fight against money laundering and terrorist financing, those countries become a part of this blacklist. And several sanctions are levied on those countries. Second is the grey list. Now, grey list serves as the warning for countries to be compliant to the direction, else face the risk of blacklisting. Now, Pakistan recently, we all know, was under this grey list, right? So, grey list includes the countries which needs to be compliant to the directions of FATF. Otherwise, they will have to face the risk of coming into this blacklist. Now, what is this significance of FATF? This FATF blacklist itself acts as a benchmark for international sanctions. So, based on this FATF blacklist, international sanctions are imposed on various countries. It also prevents state-sponsored terrorism. That is, terrorism activities which are sponsored by a particular nation, particular state, as well as illegal money laundering, of course. Now, the organization brings uniform standards for global transactions as well. Again, in order to promote good practices and prevent money laundering activities and terrorist financing in the entire world. So that's it about your Financial Action Task Force. Now let us move on to the last topic, that is Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Now recently, Russia has withdrawn from the CTBT, that is Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Now why it is very important for us to understand? For our General Studies Paper 2, based on effects of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interest, this particular CTBT treaty becomes very, very important for us. So let's understand what is this Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. So this particular treaty prohibits any nuclear weapon test, explosion or any other nuclear explosion anywhere in the world. So what is it prohibiting? It is prohibiting any nuclear weapon test, explosion or any other nuclear explosion in the entire world. That is, comprehensively, it is banning nuclear test. So that is your Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Now it was open to signature in the year 1996, in September of 1996. And it has yet been signed by 187 nations and ratified by 177 countries. Now it established a global network of monitoring facilities, and allows for on-site inspection of suspicious events. Now in 1945 and 1996, because this fact is very important for us to understand that why this CTBT came into being. From the year 1945 to 1996, there were more than 2000 nuclear tests in the world. Now 1000 of them, close to 1000 of them were done by US and 715 of them were done by Soviet Union. So during this duration of 50 years, we saw close to 2000 nuclear tests being conducted, which was a very, very bad signal for world peace and security. So this treaty, also one thing you have to understand, because of these many tests, nuclear tests happening, because of that, this treaty came into being, which said that we will comprehensively ban any type of nuclear test in the entire world. But is this treaty into force? No, the treaty is not into force. The treaty will enter into force after 44 states which are listed in the Annex 2 in the treaty will ratify this particular treaty. Until now, 8 nations among these 44 states have yet not ratified this treaty. Now, who all are the countries which have yet not ratified the treaty? One, of course, is India, which has not yet signed the treaty, China, then Pakistan, North Korea, Israel, Iran, Egypt, and also United States. So, US also still has not ratified this particular treaty. But why India chose not to align to this treaty? What is the reason for it? First of all, national security considerations. Because India was a new nuclear power, India didn't want to give its nuclear security up and also to give its power to have nuclear tests to the international world. So in order to ensure sovereignty based on military and nuclear capabilities, India did not sign this particular treaty. And also the potential security threats, of course, which we have from the 2 more nuclear powers, that is Pakistan and China. Now, Pakistan and China has also not ratified this treaty. That is why India also chose not to ratify it. Also, signing this treaty will undermine the national security and strategic autonomy of India. So these are the primary reasons because of which India chose not to align to this particular treaty, because India was having its own reservations. So that's it about your comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty. So all the very best in your preparation. Have a very good day.